After so many years of making these, there have only been two shows that I found the most difficult to talk about. One is Maran Senki Ryukendo, and the other is Kamen Rider Fourze. No, really, it took me forever to even think about how to start this video, often just staring at my screen for hours at a time. Why these shows were difficult to talk about is simple to pinpoint, and there's even a little phrase that goes, "It's easier to talk about a bad show than a good one." I've put up warnings ahead of time in my updates that stated, there's only so many times I can say that Fourze is good. Normally, I'd wait till at least until the midway point or even the end to give my straightforward rating on the show. But it's Kamen Rider Fourze. It's very rare that I ever see any negativity towards this season, most of which I wouldn't agree with in the first place, though that's for later. With how expansive the Kamen Rider franchise has gotten, you'd think maybe ideas were starting to run out after 40 years, but that couldn't be farther from the truth, as much as some naysayers may have you believe. Sure, Kamen Rider doesn't focus on the bug motifs anymore like the Showa era did, but a series that goes on for more than 5 years, let alone 40, has to evolve sometime. I've been over this topic before, saying that the Heisei era evolved over the course of 3 seasons, in my opinion. Someone argued that Kamen Rider Black and Black RX were where the real change started, since that's the true split between Showa and Heisei. Some would even go further back and say that Sky Rider, maybe even Amazon, had their own quote-unquote unique eras. Although most can easily designate Showa and Heisei along with Heisei Phase 2 or Neo Heisei. Although Phase 2 is where I've seen some debates start as to where Kamen Rider either jumped the shark or changed too much for its own good. And it all boils down to being toyetic, that is, where the show pushed the toys more than before. While I personally think that's a very weak reason to dislike what the franchise supposedly became, I can still see where some people would get annoyed at constantly having gimmicks in your face. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'd say I'm even a whole era ahead of myself, but anyway. Kamen Rider Double was the beginning of what some refer to as Heisei Phase 2, and it was praised to be the next step in the franchise's evolution, more so seen in hindsight. The next show, Kamen Rider O's, was bound to continue the hype, especially with an American and Western audience continuously growing with the help of dedicated fan groups and social media. Now the franchise's 40th anniversary is happening in 2012. Meanwhile, Super Sentai is celebrating their own anniversary with Kaizuko Sentai Gokaiger, and is about to go into their next season, Tokumei Sentai Go Busters. It seemed like it was a good time for Tokusatsu. However, not everything was going positively in Japan. On March 11th of 2011, several tragic events occurred, resulting in one of the biggest natural disasters in history, known as Higashi Nihon Daishinai, or the Tohoku earthquake of 2011. It was a sad time that shouldn't be looked over and should be treated with respect. There was plenty of mourning for those that were lost, but it was also a time of hope, especially for children. Some saw hope in a Kamen Rider statue that survived the earthquake, and as 2020 has shown, we're all in this together. There comes a time of hope after tragedy, and Toei knew this, with the producers stating that they wanted their next season to be a happy one. Kamen Rider seasons are planned far in advance. I've heard as far as 2 years, but it seems like there wasn't too much time to plan for any big changes when the next season was to air only 6 months away. However, the writers and directors wanted this to be uplifting, specifically stating that they wanted kids to, quote-unquote, make friends and play. Oddly enough, the main inspirations for this season were American high school media from John Hughes movies, more specifically The Breakfast Club. As if this season doesn't get an intentional comparisons in the first place. Let's not forget that this show is also going to be airing on Kamen Rider's 40th anniversary, so it was easy to name Kamen Rider Fourze. 40, 40, Fo, Zero, Fourze. I've heard several pronunciations, including Fourze, Fourze, and infamously Fourze, but let me explain it briefly. Yes, the name is based on the number 40, with each digit said separately, 4 and 0, but if you read it with Japanese katakana, then it would be Fo and Zero. So combined you get Fourze. Fourze. Katakana is based on phonetics while listening to an English word, so in Japanese it would be Fourze. And in English, it would be closer to Fourze. Fourze. I'll talk about pronunciations again when we get to Kamen Rider Geo. Oh, trust me on that. But I've been studying Japanese to get better at this stuff, even though I'm still going to pronounce names and words with an American English dialect. Thank you. So fans of the franchise most likely know the designation between the Showa and Heisei era, along with Neo Heisei. Although there's one grouping that I personally bring up a lot. Double O's and Fourze, to me, are like an unofficial trilogy, and I'm sure a lot of you can see it too. One example I see is the number theory, though I'm surprised it's taken me this long to bring that up at all. Just by hearing that, I know a lot of you groaned, but it's important enough to bring up so I can agree and also disagree with it. The number theory goes beyond just the toy looking or adding up to a number. Sure, that's probably the most obvious part, but there's a bigger theme that goes with what the numeral is. Basically, Kamen Rider Double has a theming of twos, 2 people to make 1 Kamen Rider, 2 Gaia memories, 2 episode arcs. And episode titles are made up of 2 separate parts. Kamen Rider O's uses 3 medals, and its episode titles are made up of 3 parts. Kamen Rider Fourze is surrounded by Fourze, with 4 switches and 4 slots in the driver, 4 kanji in its episode titles, and of course, being the 40th anniversary. The number theory seems plausible, up to Fourze. Anything after that is just stretching it beyond my opinion. Again, it's more than just belts and gimmicks. The Japanese episode titles go along with their numbering, and I'd even go as far as saying that the seasons themselves have stories and characters that can tie into those numerals. Seasons past Fourze? Yeah, I don't think so. The furthest I can see is Wizard having a 5-fingered hand for the driver, but even then, it's not like there's anything that goes that much deeper. And don't even get me started on how much the number theory is stretched past that. Seriously, a Gashet looking like a 9? Or a Shift Car looking like a 7? Come on. Well, like I said, Double O's and Fourze seem to connect quite a bit, even if it's not entirely obvious. Number theory aside, Foundation X is brought up mostly between these 3. There are some story themes that are a lot closer to each other, and there's a special crossover that I'll get to soon enough. Although I'll be fast to admit that a lot of this may just be coincidences, since the head writers for these seasons are always different. Speaking of which, Fourze's main writer is an interesting case, as he's written mostly for anime before. You might have heard of a little show called Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann. Kazuki Nakashima was brought in to write for this season, as if Fourze doesn't get compared to anime enough. He also wrote for a few movies and a couple episodes of Kamen Rider Double. Oh. Okay, it just hit me why I like Fourze so much. Nakashima's direction for Fourze was given in a question. What does it mean to be a Kamen Rider? On a first watch through, that question didn't seem apparent, but after thinking about it, I think that's really what brings this season together. Fourze was meant to have a more personal connection, so instead of having a story revolving around a city, we have a focus on a school. Specifically, Amanagawa High School, but the producer wanted to have a much bigger contrast as a challenge, so the secondary theme of space was included too. Within the school are some interesting characters, like this student, Kengo, who is handed a love letter, but then throws it away. So a delinquent-looking boy catches that letter for him by using the power of friendship and wireworks. This is Kisaragi Gentaro, and as he says, he's going to make friends with everyone. As a new kid in school, he's surprised to already know someone, an old friend named Yuki. Being the typical school in a TV show, there are cliques of the usual geeks and jocks, but it appears that Gentaro sat in the wrong spot. So he fights some football jocks, including their leader, Jun Daimonji. While being beaten outside, a monster appears, and the only thing that can stop it is the Fourze system. Yuki and Kengo enter a locker within a closed-off area of the school, which takes them into a space station called the Rabbit Hutch, and Gentaro is following them the whole time. He overheard them talk about the Fourze driver, so once the monster attacks, he uses the driver to transform.
3, 2, 1.
One fight scene later, and Kengo butts heads with Gentaro, ending the episode. Simple and to the point, which is basically how the show is. As Phase 2 has been showing for the last couple seasons, the 2-episode structure has been a good formula to follow since they're easy to get into, and the stories are fairly straightforward. Fourze's first 12 episodes focus on Gentaro making friends and forming the Kamen Rider Club, which each 2-episode arcs are introducing a new member, while of course fighting off these monsters known as Zodiarts. The Zodiac inspiration is obvious, though the name is a combination of Zodiac and Astro astronaut. Phase 1 had some formulaic structures too, and those formulas might seem more obvious with these last few seasons, but that's not a bad thing. I think Fourze has the most basic foundations and elements, but it's still a lot of fun. The episodes are pretty typical. Someone doesn't want to be Gentro's friend, a person related to that someone is a Zodiark, Gentro defeats them with the power of friendship, and a new member is recruited to the club. Gentro and Yuki form the club without Kenga wanting them to. Then we're introduced to Miyu, the popular cheerleader, who trashed on everyone who dared to give her a present. Oh hey, I know this pool. Whoa, what a completely random setting to be in. But it turns out that Miyu doesn't like gifts because it's not the support she wants. She'd rather work hard to get where she needs. It's a pretty nice lesson, despite it not being executed all that well, but anyway, she becomes a Kamen Rider Club's president. Next is Jake, spelled with J and K, but pronounced Jake, or Jeku in Japanese. He's like an info gatherer, knowing basically everything there is about everyone in school. Jake seems to have quite a lot of friends since he hangs out with so many people. Until Zodiark kidnaps him and says that Jake can go free, only if one of his friends comes to save him. That's when Jake realized who his true friends are, Gentaro and the Kamen Rider Club. Throughout these episodes, we see these characters interact with their surroundings. I mean, it's a school, they're all bound to cross paths despite not being in the club yet. So we've had glimpses of Shun hang around, though he doesn't like that Miyu has been with Gentaro this whole time. He's the typical star jock of the school, having a statue commemorating him, and of course, getting detention before the big game.
Bad boy.
Gentaro gets through to him, so Shun admits that he's only been doing as his father tells him, and is actually jealous that the club are constantly having fun. Shun helps fight off a Zodiark using a horrible CGI monstrosity called the Power Dizer. It takes a lot of power to control, and luckily, Shun joins the club to help out even more. Fun fact, the writer wanted the Dizer to be mainly piloted by a girl, but Bandai said no, cause, it's a boys show. But at least we got to see a girl piloted at least a couple of times. Another student that's been in the background is this goth girl. She was the one that told Gentaro about the Kamen Rider urban legends, and she popped up time to time and acts, strangely to say the least. I don't like the sound of that. Well, her name is Tomoko, and she hung out with some girls who thought they were witches. Though Tomoko finds out she was just being used, so she becomes part of the Kamen Rider Club. You might think that's everyone, but remember that Kengo never agreed to the club in the first place, and has continuously been agitated since more people keep entering this secret hideout. After getting trapped in the rabbit hutch with no way out, he gets upset and calls everyone useless. Yuki says that everyone is trying their best, and Kengo's father wouldn't want to see him act this way. After defeating a related Zodiark, the group comes together and saves Kengo, having one final shot of our now complete Kamen Rider Club. How lucky that this old space station had enough suits for everyone, including their different sizes. All of that basically covered 12 episodes, but of course, it's the interactions and small stories that make Fourze a lot of fun. Each of these characters are very memorable to me, in and out of the show. Gentro's actor, Sota Fukushi, took on the role because his father was a fan of Kamen Rider, and Jake's actor is a fan of the show too, even appearing in Kamen Rider Hibiki, though his favorite writer is Riderman. And y'all should know that Sota Fukushi is actually really big in Japan. Some people outside of the Kamen Rider fandom might actually know him as Ichigo from the Bleach movie, though I knew him from a completely different live-action high school movie. Fourze was a lot different than what I remember. I couldn't find any specific examples from what I'm about to say, though it was said in an interview that Gentaro's quote-unquote regioned hair had a bit of controversy when his character was first shown, and apparently it was big enough for Gen Urobuchi to account for when he was writing for Kamen Rider Gaim. Still, Sota Fukushi pulled off the pompadour and was able to change the character a bit, since Gentaro was originally written as a bad boy punk, but later became a character with a smile. One of the most common facts that fans know about Fourze is one idea involving the club searching for mysteries about previous Kamen Riders. Yeah, that's true. Since this is the franchise's 40th anniversary, Toei wanted something to celebrate that. However, Kamen Rider Decade was already a celebration of Kamen Rider, and that was only a few years ago, so this idea was scrapped. There was also going to be cameos from previous writers, which makes me think that the budget would have been a bit tight too. However, Decade influenced Fourze a bit more than that. Since Decade had the main character be the destroyer of worlds and fight riders, a plan was for the club to befriend as many riders as they could. There are a couple leftovers from this original club idea, as you've most likely seen from Fourze's cameo in the O's Wonderful movie. With these being an anniversary, there were some references including beyond cameos, such as in the names. Each person in the writer club has some connection to a Showa writer. Miyu Kazushiro is a rearrangement of Shiro Kazami, Kamen Rider V3. Jake's name is Kaizo Jingu, coming from Kaisuke Jin, Kamen Rider X. Shun Daimonji being similar to Hayato Ichimonji, Kamen Rider Nigo, and Tomoko Nozama, Tomo being a part of Tomodachi, meaning friend, and Nozama is Amazon backwards. A lot of these may seem coincidental enough to end up being on Kamen Rider Wiki, but these were in a magazine bio, and you'll see an even closer connection when we get to the movie. Well, that's fun. Speaking of fun, the action this season really brings a smile to my face. It reminds me a lot of mid-2000s Power Rangers fights, except with a lot more CGI. I didn't mind the CG in previous seasons since they were normally just for finishers and certain attacks. Although here, I admit it's kind of distracting, especially since the Fourze suit turns into a computer-generated blob sometimes too. Also accounting for the Power Dizer, which I think has a pretty cool design. And it was actually inspired by Granzel from Uchu Tetsujin Kyodain. The Dizer has an added function of being a launch pad, which was going to be included onto Fourze's Rider Machine, but that would have been too heavy. The Rider Machine this season is the Machine Masigler, with Mashigra in Japanese meaning full speed, and the base model is a Honda XR230. Sorry, I don't know about vehicles, so that's all I got. Now, I've heard that the Fourze suit was also inspired by Kyodain, specifically Skyzel, but an interview in World Mook confirms that it was just a coincidence. Fourze clearly has foundations with a regular astronaut suit, with its helmet being a rocket ship. The key word when first designing the suit was school, but the designers had a tough time thinking of a suit that would fit that motif, so the secondary theme of space was added afterwards. Starting off with Fourze's look, it was going to have a more Showa appearance with connecting grooves, but that was already a motif for a double suit, so a more futuristic design was chosen. I'm sure you all know that at least a couple of the same suits have to be made per season, whether they're for backup, close-in shots, or stunt work, but Fourze had a total of 8 suits, 2 for close-ups and 6 for action. This was mainly because of yellowing. Since the Fourze suit was white, it would inevitably start to get sun damaged, but another reason was because the first suits were a bit hard to move in, due to the fabric not stretching out correctly in the shoulders, which influenced a lot of the posing. Let's not forget that Fourze gets his powers from Astro Switches. The producer specifically wanted 40 gimmick toys in this season, no matter what, since it was the 40th anniversary, and a lot of gimmicks weren't unheard of even in the second half of Heisei, so it was entirely possible. The weirder decision was that the original toys were gonna be buttons that would combine to create a keyboard. However, that was scrapped since buttons wouldn't have enough individuality to them, whereas Astro Switches can be molded in more fun ways and have more playability. I thought the switches were kind of boring at first, but then I actually held one at a convention years ago, and I've been wanting one ever since. They remind me of those fidget cubes with different functions on each side. Being small is kinda cute for these toys, though the props were pretty small too. And suit actor Seiji Takaiwa said how he had to be extra careful not to lose them. The abilities for these switches are unique, like a brush in place of a leg. Definitely something different. These placements were designed as to step away from what people would expect for the abilities to be. For example, a drill weapon would obviously go on the arm, right? Well, Fourze uses it on his leg. As for my personal thoughts on the aesthetics, I'm honestly not sure. I think I like the Fourze suit. Okay, well basically, I do like the suit, except for the helmet. The fabrics are sleek, and the symbols that correlate to switches on other body parts work surprisingly well. It's just that the helmet kinda ruins it for me. Separately, it would be a cute design. But on top of this futuristic look that makes me think like it was made for a completely different, bulkier suit. But I do like the concept of the rocket ship helmet. Most Kamen Riders have markings underneath their eyes. They're apparent with Showa suits and more subtle with later suits. But you can clearly see these markings all the way from Ichigo. These are described as tear lines, given to Kamen Riders with sorrowful tragedies. However, that was purposefully taken out of Fourze's helmet to make it appear as a good-willed hero. Now about the sounds. They're okay. The phrases weren't always melodic and were gonna be simple with just the but that was thought to be a step back from O's sounds. If an astral switch's number is a multiple of 10, then it transforms Fourze even further into a powerful new state. Episode 5 introduces us to the Elec switch, or electric switch, but it was a bit too much for Gentaro to handle at first. Then the power of friendship lets him go into Fourze electric states. Its motif is based on a thunder god Raijin, although I don't really see that. The goldish yellow colors are fine enough. I love our mustard rider, but why does it look like he's wearing a trash bag? I'm joking, I know these are based on those space blankets. With more power comes a new weapon. The one for electric states is Billy the Rod. It has 3 plugs because it was designed in a way for children to, quote-unquote, do what they want to, but cannot normally do, which is plugging and unplugging an electrical outlet. Our next power-up is Fire States. Red looks pretty good for this suit. Even the helmet doesn't bother me this time. This weapon is the He Hack Gun, which is a fire extinguisher that can also shoot flames. That seems a bit strange, but Kazuki Nakashima said that it's better to have both abilities in one weapon, just in case. I don't want to know what I'd have to face to use both those features. You probably noticed that the weapons are references to famous movie figures, Billy the Kid for Billy the Rod, and okay, bear with me. Gene Hackman and Hugh Jackman for He Hack Gun. I know, that doesn't sound right or plausible whatsoever, but detail of Hero 7, page 83. Of course, there's also the Fourze driver, which was first designed as a cockpit with more than just switches, but that wasn't interesting enough, so there was a focus on making it a control console, with the lever on the side adding more playability and to make the user more in control. Same with the screen on the front side. I personally don't like the driver that much, though it does fit the suit pretty well. We have some new gadgets this season with the Foodroids. Since Kamen Rider fights are saved for the end, the Foodroids were made to keep children interested. Though before fast food was chosen, other common school supplies were thought of at first, like paper and pencils. But that was thought to be too boring. Space animals were another idea, though that was thought too late into production. There wasn't any There weren't any specific animal designs in mind for the Foodroids, since O's and Double already implemented animal motifs in their own gadgets. The Foodroids are super cute though. I just realized I've been saying that a lot of things are cute this season. After episode 14, we get into our first movie. Kamen Rider x Kamen Rider Fourze and O's Movie Wars Megamax. Most crossovers are in 3 parts, the first 2 centering on stories for the previous and current season of Kamen Rider, with the third part being the crossover portion. However, Megamax has 5 parts. The first portion reintroduces us to the 7 legendary riders as they fight off Foundation X, who are searching for Solu, seeds of life form from the universe. The next portion is Oza's epilogue, with Eiji Hino wandering the earth in search for a friend, then gets involved with the evil Kamen Rider Poseidon. As well as a Kamen Rider from the future. Part 3 is short, but shows us Hidari Shotaro on a case to fight against Foundation X. And now the part we're going to focus on is Fourze's, where Amanaga High School is having a fair, and the Kamen Rider Club are on to talk about the urban legends of Kamen Riders. They're even wearing makeshift costumes of their respective name inspirations. No one really seems into it, especially Jake, who wants to have the typical high school life of having a girlfriend. Then a girl falls from the sky. Gentaro saves her, but she doesn't speak, though her ID says she's Misaki Narishiko from Tsubadaboshi High School. Aw, it seems like Gentaro might have a crush on her. Some mooks, called Dustards, begin to attack the school. Gentaro transforms, and so does Narishiko. Henshin! This is Kamen Rider Narishiko, and her design is so adorable. Oh, before anyone points it out, Narishiko's kanji is pronounced Nadeshiko, but it's another name I'm used to saying as Narishiko, just cuz, so Yeah. Afterwards, she and Gentaro go to the amusement park for some fun, and they eventually visit the moon. Nadeshiko takes off her helmet, and she's the escaped Solu, a being of slime that can replace anything, and she only acts on reflex, meaning that her feelings for Gentaro weren't exactly out of love. Foundation X go to retrieve Nadeshiko, but Gentaro won't let them take her without a fight. He saves her and they're about to do a friendship handshake, but the Foundation's leader absorbs Nadeshiko's essence into a switch, essentially making her disappear for good. Gentaro starts to cry, so the rest of the club buy him enough time to let it all out. 3, 2, 1! Once he's ready, he picks up a switch that Nadeshiko left behind, becoming Rocket States. Then Eiji Hino, Kamen Rider O's, asks Gentaro for help, leading us to Part 5, Movie Wars Megamax. Eiji introduces Gentaro to Shotaro and Philip, Kamen Rider Double. What comes next is one of my favorite parts in any Kamen Rider movie, a crossover with our unofficial trilogy. Fight after fight filled with amazing action, and to celebrate the 40th anniversary, we have the 7 legendary riders in their own fights against Dopants, Yomis, and Zodiarts. Eiji even receives a power-up from the future with Super Tatoba. Not getting into that now. Then the day is saved and Nadeshiko is left as a ball of energy, leaving Gentaro with a kiss. Eiji continues to search for his friend. Gentaro sees the real Nadeshiko pass by, and finally, a cameo of a new Kamen Rider. This is one of my favorite Kamen Rider movies ever. Top 3, maybe even my number 1. Having the first 3 main riders share scenes together is just the icing on the cake, but I absolutely adore each part, especially Fourze's portion. I talked about Oza's part in his own video, and I still love seeing Eiji and friends one more time, along with Shotaro remembering Eiji's words from their crossover. Riders help each other out. Plus, the fights are memorable and don't let up. The characters are amazing and don't waste a single second with their scenes. Foundation X tying everything together as the main antagonist is basically what I wanted with continuity like this, and man, I just really love Kamen Rider, and I love this movie so much. After this, you can also watch the Hyper Battle video, Rocket Drill States of Friendship, where Gentaro makes friends with Kamen Rider Amazon and gets a new form. Plus it's cute, just like the Crayon Shinchan crossover. Huh, so many crossovers. As we reach the 30-minute mark, you've probably noticed that I haven't really gone over a recap of the show, and that's because Fourze is probably the most episodic and most basic of Heisei Phase 2. Though as I've been trying to establish, that it's still a really good and fun show. Plus there's a bit more to the Zodiarts, such as these generals who are known as horoscopes. Their main plan is to awaken 8 more powerful Zodiarts by using the power of a supernova, or their switches becoming a last one. If a switch activates using last one, then there's a chance the Zodiart can become a horoscope. The main person behind all this is Gamo Matsuaki, an astronaut that later founded Amanagawa High School, and he was the main reason Yuki wanted to go to the school in the first place. The club only know Gamo as the chairman of the school, but once word gets out about monsters attacking, angry moms go to get answers about it. Then a handsome gentleman calms them down. He's Principal Hayami, a horoscope. Hayami is so cool. If that wasn't trouble enough, a new Kamen Rider has been appearing, as well as a new student, Sakata Ryusei from Subaru Boshi High. The audience has shown that Ryusei is Kamen Rider Meteor.
Kamen Rider Meteor. お前の定めが俺が決める。
His mission is to find the Aries Zodiarts that has some connection to his friend, Jiro, who's currently in the hospital. Someone in space named Tachibana directs him where to go, and says that Ryusei's identity should be kept a secret. Kamen Rider Meteor used to be one of my least favorite writers. And it's because I think I was unfair to him, constantly comparing his story to other seasons. I've mostly said, oh, I've seen this done way better in other seasons. Ooh, it's a serious secondary writer. Whoa, never seen that before in Kamen Rider. But after rewatching Fourze for this video, I think I'm starting to like him. He has a gorgeous suit, the body's motif being cosmic energy rippling through space, with a dash of Kamen Rider Super 1. No, really, Meteor had a basis from Super 1, mostly with the Kenpo fighting style. If you know anything about Meteor, then you most likely know about his funky disco-based belt. Although the producer wasn't a fan of that at first, since it didn't fit with Meteor's cool style. But he was later told that it would make Ryusei's character more interesting, and he lightened up to it. Plus, I really love Meteor's catchphrase, "Your fate is mine to decide." Oh, that's so cool. The Fourze driver is based on a console with flippable switches, so the Meteor Galaxy was based on a console's mixer. A cool integration is the finger scanner for finishers, which was an idea for the Astro switches, but later put into the Meteor Galaxy. Another thing you might already know, or call Meteor, is Bruce Lee, because of all the whooping he does while fighting. You'd think I'd get annoyed by this, especially since they put a filter over his voice. But again, I'm starting to like Meteor and his fights are just really cool. Ryusei eventually weasels his way into the club, though Gentaro was the only one who didn't want him in at first. After a while, Ryusei gets fed up with Gentaro and punches him. That's when Gentaro accepts Ryusei because at least the punch came from the heart. I love Gentaro. A dragon Zodiart appears in the school, and it's as hard as steel. Luckily, Kengo had new switches in the works, a pair that create the N and S magnet switches. Although Gentaro let Ryusei handle the testing, making Kengo jealous and upset, practically breaking off their friendship. Ryusei remembers these feelings from Jiro, so he convinces Kengo to be friends again, with an analogy using magnets. Kengo apologizes, saying that he was jealous but realized that Gentaro only wanted to lighten Kengo's workload. With their power of friendship restored, Gentaro uses these new switches to get a super form. Egg states. Just kidding. It's Fourze Magnet states. Suit actor Seiji Takaiwa said he didn't like wearing this suit since it was super bulky and even more difficult to move in. I don't like the suit because it looks like an egg. Two switches becoming controllers is a neat idea, since they separate from a singular mag phone. The designer for the Switch wanted to have just one control stick, but figured that would have been too boring. And he also wanted the motif to be a spear. Then that was rejected for being a bit out there for a child to play with, so a phone was chosen instead. The Dragon Zodiart is defeated, and the power of friendship continues on. One day in Amanagao High School, some strange-looking aliens attack. Gentaro fights them off, but gets blasted away and meets a pirate with a red coat. He's Captain Marvelous of Kaizuko Sentai Gokaiger. And he's here to defeat every Kamen Rider. Meanwhile, the Special Ops team, Go Busters, fight off more monsters that are in the command of Tsukasa Kadoya, Kamen Rider Decade. This can only mean that after so many seasons, we finally reached Superhero Taisen. Despite airing during Fourze and Go Busters, they actually don't appear in this movie all that much. Maybe I should have talked about this during Decade, since it's mostly him butting heads with Captain Marvelous. Who we actually follow in the story are Joe and Doc from the Gokaigers, along with Daiki Kaito, Kamen Rider The End, and Hina from Kamen Rider O's. Really wish we got another non-Decade or Gokaiger representative, but I guess it makes sense. Although Hina is such a random choice, but I'm not complaining. Then we have villains from across the history of Sentai and Rider as armies for Tsukasa and Marvelous. The villains we do see are covered in suits, so that was pretty easy. But at least we have Narataki wearing... What the heck is that? Yes, I know it's based on a Rider villain. You don't have to tell me in the comments. There were plans to add in more face villains, but their main choice already passed, so that was sad news. Beyond that, both sides are dedicated to wiping each other out before the other does. Meanwhile, Kaito and the group are searching for answers as to why. This is a huge crossover with Kamen Rider and Super Sentai, finally on the big screen. More ambitious than Avengers, more characters on screen than you could ever imagine, and all the more disappointing. This was a celebration of both sides coming together for one big adventure, even though Kamen Rider was clearly the more favored one, as most of the production staff and advertising came from Rider's side. But okay, what really goes on during the movie? Kaito and group run around, encountering Marvelous and Tsukasa fight, trying to save themselves from getting wiped out, and there's even some cameos from the Denliner crew. Personal anecdote, Superhero Taisen was the first time I ever saw the Taros and thought they were like this in Denno's season. Luckily, I was wrong and they're not actually flanderized caricatures, but Superhero Taisen almost made me think they were. Within the fandom, Japanese fans especially, the Superhero Taisen series isn't really seen in a fond light. And when it comes to my personal thoughts, yeah, no, I definitely agree. These movies aren't exactly the best. I've seen Superhero Taisen 5 times now, counting this rewatch, and it got worse every time for me. The story and motivations behind each character almost seem like the writer only vaguely heard about them in passing, because these characters don't act like themselves. Even the very minor cameos only have a couple lines say things I wouldn't expect them to say. One of the weirdest turning points is when Kaito gets jealous that his boyfriend Tsukasa betrayed the friendship they supposedly had, so Kaito decides to become the big bad of the movie last minute. I honestly wish I was joking, but Kaito really was mad that Tsukasa hid his secret plan from him. Oh right, so the plan with Tsukasa and Marvelous was that they would pretend to destroy each other's side, but in reality send them to a pocket dimension, so they can have everyone fight against the villain group. Why did Tsukasa and Marvelous hide this from their own friends? There's a simple explanation for that. My friend Mage once said,
Superhero Taisen is just guys shitty fanfiction.
And I couldn't have said it any better myself. It's all really bad fanfiction. As I said earlier, this was just straight up disappointing. There is barely interaction with both sides. Ironic considering Eiji and Kentaro are both here. I know it's expensive to bring back actors, but I was kind of expecting a bit more outside of Fourze and Go Busters. Even the villains seem disappointing. I know I'm being vague, though it's only because there isn't much more I can say. Kaito and acquaintances go on an adventure that doesn't feel like some journey to stop the war of two sides. It's having this big idea of two huge franchises crossing over, but only having a small focus. This movie is just awful. But this is so cool. The last third of the movie is nothing but fights. Finally, one of the biggest crossovers in history, and the tokusatsu elements are all there. The cheesy special effects, the hand-to-hand action with nearly 500 suit actors on screen, the camera panning on this wide scope for about a minute, Kamen Rider Black and Black RX being together at the same time even though that doesn't make any sense. I don't even care. And even the smaller fights before this part are cool too. Marvelous versus Decade when they go on their all-out transformations, Kabuto versus Red Buster, Gentaro getting the chance to pilot a mech, Tsukasa's hair being this weird granny thing I've never seen before, the giant battles with Big Machine that leads them to outer space, card-based Kamen Riders getting powered from the Ghost Agers, which I admit is actually pretty cool. Honore Decado, the Gokaijers getting O's keys that don't even make sense, but again, this is just really awesome. Sure, the movie as a whole isn't all that great, and it did get worse for me, but the last third more than makes up for it. I don't need CGI all over the place. I just like seeing people in spandex fight in a quarry. And that's exactly what I got. No matter what anyone says, if you haven't seen Superhero Taisen, then please do at least once in your life. That finale is an iconic moment in tokusatsu, and it's definitely worth the watch. And watch Superhero Taisen too. It's really funny.
3、2、1、仮面ライダーフォーゼ
Hey everyone, so for those that don't know me, which I'm pretty sure is most of y'all, my name is Austin, and I also go by the name Omni Ranger. I really wanted to put my thoughts of Fourze into this video because it is my all-time favorite Rider series. When I was getting into Kamen Rider, it was sort of a slow start. It took about 2 or 3 years for me to finally start getting into it and trying to catch up with everything. But when I saw the O's movie that celebrated the 40th anniversary about a year after it came out, and after I watched the Z Cross special, I decided to finally watch more and try to start catching up with it. So I decided to watch the Fourze and O's movie, which I'd already seen I'd already seen things from O's and W, and they were the main things that made me watch it. But that movie itself is what made me want to watch Fourze. And Fourze was about 35 episodes in before I had started binge watching it and playing catch up, and I immediately fell in love with it. And there was so much to love with it as well. The design sort of stood out for me, even though it had the traditional minor aspects of a rider suit. It still stuck out as a white colored suit with this weird astronaut helmet, and I just got so intrigued by that. There was a huge line for its gimmick with a bunch of those switches. There were still only about 4 or 5 forms for Fourze to use, so it wasn't this difficult power scale, just the different weapons for him to use. That was probably the most amusing thing about his gimmick, and which is why it's still one of my favorite gimmicks as well. It was a little easy to get into because of its lighthearted atmosphere, and all the characters were in high school, which is something I was very used to because of Power Rangers. It had also had a bunch of common tropes that you would see in Rider, with a secondary rider that he would always butt heads with, but eventually become friends with, a friendly protagonist that always wanted to help everybody, same old, same old. But what made Fourze stand out the most was its characters. In terms of the main cast, what the Kamen Rider Club, you have Mew, who was this stern woman that also doubled as a bad bitch that could also be a good leader. You had Shun, who was the muscle, but it was also a softie trying to do right by the people that he cared about and always tried to please them. You had Tomoko, who had this odd and unique thinking style that helped her think outside the box and also got the entire club out of its jams. You had Jake, who was this, I like to call him a networking jokester, to be honest, because he always knows everyone around the school and what's going on. He was always like a goofball too, especially with the Rider Club. You have Yuki, who was this energetic nerd that was always passionate and hardworking for what she wanted to go for. You had Kengo, who was this antisocial person that always had these walls up, even though deep down he was probably one of, if not the most vulnerable person. You had Ryusei, who was this fish out of water that was stuck in the past, and even though he secretly got along with the Rider Club, even though he didn't want to admit it until long after, he would always be protective by pushing them away, which is how the best way that he could show it while he was also trying to save his friend. And then, of course, you have Gentaro, who is a simple, straightforward kid that just wants to make everybody happy and just wants to be friends with everybody. Always does his best to make sure no one gets left behind. I should have said this earlier, but all of these traits that I'm mentioning of each of these main characters in the club, I feel like those are the things that make them stand out the most, the things that bring the entire club together, and the things that are also the most relatable in terms of what you see within these characters. Sort of kind of going back to Gentaro, because he's the type that leaves no person behind, he makes this impression on these people that he only comes across for 1 or 2 episodes, and even though you don't see them much, if not at all, for the rest of the series, he makes such an important impression on them that they're all affected in such a positive way by him. It always makes them want to do better or to be better people. I really don't want to talk too much about this series since there's a lot to talk about it, honestly, especially with the characters themselves. But overall, like I said earlier, Fourze is my all-time favorite series. You'd have to watch it for yourself, honestly, to really see how strong these characters are and what makes them so great. I think I'll go ahead and end it here. Hopefully, if you haven't seen Fourze by now, you do get a chance to watch it. And if you do get a chance to watch it, hopefully you really get to enjoy it as much as I did.
3、2、1、仮面ライダーフォーゼ
Springtime is here in Amanagawa High, and the school is abuzz about the prom. all except for Miyu, because unfortunately, this also marks her and Shun's graduation. While she's thinking about the future without the club, Shun continuously tries to ask her out to the prom, but she shoots him down every time. Enough is enough when Shun arrives late to a fight while wearing a clown costume. Miyu admits that she wants to go to the prom with Gentaro. By the end, Gentaro and friends stake out the prom to protect it from a Zodiark, so Miyu and Shun go to the dance together anyway. They have their dance, but Shun doesn't feel right about this. He wants to protect the prom with the club, so he and Miyu join their friends, all while this beautiful song is played by a cameo of the Kamen Rider girls. It's time to graduate and say farewell. Then say good morning, cause Shun and Miyu are going to a nearby college, so they can still hang around the Kamen Rider Club. The song that was played is called Saete, meaning bloom. This is actually a cover originally by the band Everset, first released in 2008. Though Kamen Rider Girls and Everset are under the same label, Avex, so this was an easy choice to cover. Besides, Saite is just a gorgeous song, but even the original or the live versions are still amazing. This might be my favorite KRG performance, even if it's a cover. Their vocals are perfect for a hopeful song like this. I absolutely adore it. But I actually really love all of Fourze's vocal music, so let's get into that. Some might know that Fourze's opening theme, Switch On, isn't anywhere near my favorite themes. I even put it at number 20 in my favorite openings countdown. But it's a great song, a ton of fun with some nerdy sounding lyrics about enjoying your school days. The Japan Area Space Exploration Agency, or JAXA, fully supported Fourze and was even included in the opening, as well as in a few episodes. The singer, Ana Tsuchiya, has some powerful vocals that works well with the energy. She took on the spot to sing this opening for her kid that was a fan of Kamen Rider. That's cute. Speaking of cute, sometimes Yuki sings this song about Hayabusa, which her actress ad-libbed and was allowed to put into the show, and that's absolutely adorable. Next, we have some insert themes. One small step for man, one giant step from Fourze. I usually like having at least 2 or 3 insert themes before a super form is introduced, though Giant Step is pretty much the only one for half the season, and I enjoy it a lot more than you think I would. That opening sounds like the introduction to some big RPG boss battles, and the vocals by Mine, as well as Yoshiharu Shina, are a great combination. The chorus's energetic vocals saying that one step may seem small to you, but it's a giant step that influences the world. Now if that ain't hype during the battle. So I don't usually bring up themes from outside the TV show, but this was too cool to leave out. Endless Played, performed by Astronauts, a band that Mine and Sheena formed just for Fourze. This song is definitely still bringing that hype, and I love the guitar so much. It reminds me of the days I was in a hard rock band. You might be wondering, what does this have to do with Fourze? It doesn't appear in the show. Well, it was the theme for Climax Heroes Fourze. Huh, never thought that I'd bring up any of the video games. Once Fourze receives magnet states, we're introduced to Bounce Back, performed by Southern. As the first lyrics say, get the energy flowing and feel its beat. This doesn't really feel like Fourze that much to me, but I still love it a lot. Fourze's music, to me, is about the weird futuristic spacey sounds with keyboards, although the guitars carry most of the music for me too. Bounce Back hits that sweet spot of energy and a tone that says, yeah, our hero is about to defeat the monster, and look cool doing it. I've probably talked about Kishidan enough to the point that a video about them is inevitable, but come on, Sho or DJ Ozma or Sumitada Ozumano has a very recognizable voice. Megamax's theme is Samurai Strong Style, which I feel is the perfect blend of O's and Fourze, feeling like an ending, but also a new beginning, as well as paying respects to the past, since Sho stated that he wanted the song to feel like an old school Showa theme with a modern heroic touch. Obviously I love Sho's vocals, but the instruments are fantastic for this song too. Well, of course they're fantastic. Marty Friedman, formerly of Megadeth, played guitar for this, which I never thought I'd ever say Megadeth in the Kamen Rider video. But here we are. Samurai Strong Style might be one of those songs I can play for hours at a time and love every second of it. What a coincidence that one of Everset's songs was covered by KRG. Now we have the band performing Shooting Star, Meteor's theme. I'm glad we got another insert song outside of Giant Step. And what an amazing one this is. I think Shooting Star is the hypest out of all the vocal songs, especially with that chorus. I mean, come on, make that fist reach its destination like a shooting star? That lyric is so out there, I can't help but to love it. Meteor already gave me that Bruce Lee or Kung Fu movie vibe, and this theme adds another layer of excitement to his fighting style. Not to mention this throwback verse to Saite. That's just friggin' cool. Our last one for now is Evolving Storm, also by Everset. I swear I don't have a bias towards guitar since I'm more of a bass player, but the guitar here is amazing. It's kind of what I imagined as a theme for someone as cool as Kamen Rider Meteor, and the music video is a lot of fun too. Oh, you might be wondering who this theme is for. It's Kamen Rider Meteor Storm's theme, of course. At one point, Ryusei was given the choice to either save Gentaro and friends or receive a power-up from Tachibana. It was an intense arc where Ryusei's identity was revealed to that Zodiart by accident, so it was either him or the club. Tachibana deauthorized Ryusei's transformations, which was where the choice came in. Ultimately, Ryusei gave up on Tachibana's gift to save Gentaro, although that was just a test to see if Ryusei would make the honest decision. So with this power-up in hand, Ryusei becomes Meteor Storm.
Meteor Storm! Meteor on! Ready?
Nope. No. What even are those colors? Just, no. The Beyblade staff is cool, but the rest is... No. I know like two of you like this, but no. Come on. So there's one character that I have yet to mention at all, but they are the best character in the entire season, nay, the entire franchise. I have been saving this single moment to talk about them, because their 30-episode journey is about to reach its peak. Mr. Osugi, I salute you. From the very first episode's introduction, to you fawning over a teacher that clearly isn't interested, to the funny faces you make when trying to give Gentaro detention, and the best moments being when you're always close to catching Gentaro transform. Every moment with you has been great, but now in episode 29 and episode 30, he finally learns the truth behind the Kamen Rider Club, and even helps Gentaro get a new Astro Switch. Mr. Osugi, thank you for being such a great character from beginning to end. He's a pretty funny guy outside the show, being part of the comedy duo Ungirls, and his partner appears in the summer movie too. Our next big arc happens right after Mr. Osugi becomes the advisor for the club. Now that all 39 Astro Switches have been completed, Kengo introduces number 40. The Cosmic Switch. Although, Ryusei is more interested in a new Zodiart that has been spotted at his old school, Subaruboshi. He and the club get permission to take a trip there, and the atmosphere is really dreary, with students not feeling like themselves, and even the teachers are scared of something. That something, or someone, is a student named Yamada, a transfer student from Amanagawa High School, and the Aries Zodiart. He has the power to put people to sleep, and then take control of them even further. Gentaro tries to put a stop to him, but Ryusei fights Gentaro even harder than before. Ryusei hesitates for a second, then stops Gentaro's heart. Tachibana cancels out Ryusei's transformation, and the rest of the club yell out for Gentaro. Ryusei made a deal with Yamada to defeat Gentaro, so Yamada can awaken Jito from his coma. Jito's curse is lifted after pressing his old switch, but doesn't feel like Ryusei was the person he once was. Deep down, Ryusei really did want to be Gentaro's friend, and now realized the mistake he made. Meanwhile, Kengo and Osugi are trying to find a way to bring Gentaro back, but he really is just a lifeless corpse. Okay, I know this is a kid's show, but that's like really morbid. Kengo stands out on the moon and has a feeling that leads him to dusting away the side of the rabbit hutch. There's a message left behind by his dad about friendship being the strongest bond. Gentaro sees his parents and is about to go to the light, but Kengo tells him not to go, and rather look at the door of friendship, because everyone will be there for him. Ryusei decides to try to save the Kamen Rider Club himself, having civilian fights and even saying his catchphrase out of suit. He's about to fall until Gentaro catches him, gives him a handshake, and transforms. Kamen Rider Fourze Cosmic States. Its original name was Apollo States, named after the Apollo space missions, but Cosmic had a more direct association with the other names and, well, space. Other ideas were having the suit be green, and having its chest be based on an iPhone's touchpad, even considered to be part of its head and arms. Although I'm really happy with the Cosmic States we have now. Kinda. The Bodyzone sword is a spaceship starting from a launch pad in its closed form and opening up to leave a trail in space. It was going to be a much more complex toy, with the tip having pieces fall apart like a ship falling back to Earth. And the funniest bit of trivia, the original name was a Yariken sword, inspired by Harrison Ford of all people. Then the name became the Killzester Zubatadan and was shortened to the Bodyzone sword. With the power of all 40 switches, and more importantly friendship, as well as brand new toys, Fourze Cosmic States defeats Ares. Jito is recovering from his coma, and Tachibana allows Ryusei to transform as long as the club keeps his secret. Oh look, we've already reached the final stretch. Starting with the summer movie, it's Spacetime, everybody. Well, actually, I've been thinking about this for a while now, on how to handle the last section of Fourze, since I barely had any recap at all. I really want you all to experience the last 10 episodes yourself. As many times as I called Fourze a basic show, its final stretch has many twists and turns that not even I was expecting my first time watching, and it's not something I'd want to ruin, especially because I think Fourze is one of the easiest shows to start off with. Sure, I can talk about Blades and Oza's endings, but those being more narrative focused, it was inevitable that I bring them up. Whereas here, it's been more production and review rather than a big recap. I hope you can all sincerely understand where I'm coming from, and I double promise, cross my heart, triple promise to the moon that I won't skip an ending again. Besides, now you can experience the ending yourself rather than saying that you just watched my video on it. Let's talk about the movie. Aside from celebrating 40 years of Kamen Rider, this movie was also meant to celebrate Shotaro Yoshinomori's other work, as well as the first manned spaceflight. Here we have appearances by the actual Uchu Techijin Kyuyodyne. What a coincidence. But now with a more updated look. We follow Miki Hara as Inga Blink, who's trying to stop some Zodiarts from taking over a giant space station. Apparently Inga Blink is an anagram for a character in Kyuyodyne, which I kind of like that, but at the same time, it's Inga Blink? I love tokusatsu names. The first half of the movie has the Kamen Rider Club go through some training so they can fly out to the station and investigate. And the rest is non-stop action that, again, I just absolutely adore. One of the best scenes is when a group of fake horoscopes attacks as the club hurries to their spaceship. So Ryusei and Gentaro go all out, using every switch they can. Yes, all 40. Plenty of CGI, but a lot more practical effects. The action is fantastic, the cinematography is great, and I just love this to death. As well as the club having their own Dizers, the special effects looking cool, and of course... However, none of that comes close to one of my favorite scenes in the entire Kamen Rider franchise. Once the villains reveal themselves, Ryusei and Gentaro are weakened and can barely fight much longer, so the Kamen Rider Club use the power of friendship within the switches. They give all the Astro Switches to characters we've seen within the show, but there's only one left and no one else to take it, so the chairman agrees to flip it. They all focus their thoughts on helping Gentaro and flip the switches together, thus creating the Fusion Astro Switch, having Ryusei and Gentaro use polymerization to become Kamen Rider Fourze Fusion States. The day is saved and Gentaro makes friends with the spaceship. The song playing right now is called Voyagers, the movie theme sung by Ana Tsuchiya. It's another one of those songs where I feel like it doesn't fit the season, but that doesn't matter, because this is one of my favorite themes ever. It's a gorgeous piece of music that's about never letting go, even if we reach our destination. We'll cross the universe as Voyagers and connect just like the constellations. Cheesy? Yeah, but I'll certainly never forget the passion that comes not only from the song, but also Kamen Rider Fourze. And if you want to look towards the future, Gentaro becomes a teacher, as everyone else advances their careers, which leads them to one more club get together and team up with Kamen Rider Wizard. This isn't the end of our Kamen Rider Club. Gentaro and everyone else will always be there when you need a friend, because I think we all need a little bit of Fourze.
3、2、1、仮面ライダーフォーゼ
Hey guys, I'm EmerJason, and Kamen Rider Fourze is my favorite season of Kamen Rider. Fourze holds a really special place in my heart as it was one of the most enjoyable and fun-filled experiences I've had watching any Rider season. I remember watching it alongside a friend who had gotten into Kamen Rider and Tokusatsu, and we both ended up adoring Fourze for its wholesome cast of characters and its well-paced story. This season having a much different feel to it compared to any other Rider season up to that point, with the high school setting and all, made it feel really refreshing. I actually found myself laughing at a lot of the jokes and humorous moments that they used. The Kamen Rider Club being some of my favorite characters in the entire franchise, they bounce off each other so well, and their transformation from how they are at the beginning of the show to how they are by the end is incredibly satisfying and even heartwarming. Even the civilians of the week were really interesting, and their stories meant something to our main hero, being of which Gentaro is best boy. There's literally no way you can hate him. Fourze is honestly just wholesome fun for anyone who is seeking a season full of positivity, even till the very end. But that's barely scraping the bottom of the barrel for moments that bring tears to the viewer's eyes. If you ever want to feel something, please watch Kamen Rider Fourze. I cannot stress that enough. It's funny, it's dark, it's sad, the action's really good. It is all just perfect, and not only to me, but to a lot of others. I highly recommend you sit down and watch Fourze, especially during these dark times. You would really get a kick out of it. I'd like to thank Marcos for having me on this video. As he knows, Fourze is my favorite season. I was very happy when he approached me about it, so yeah. All I gotta say is stay safe and wear a mask. Ciao.
Kamen Rider Fourze. I really don't have much to add that you haven't already heard before. And if you're new, then what are you waiting for? Go watch it at
legal distributor here.
One thing I constantly hear that I've been wanting to address for the longest time is when people say that Fourze is the closest we've gotten to a live action anime. Honestly, I really don't know where that's coming from. Sure, the script writer has an anime background, but Fourze fits right in with other writer shows. Now, I don't mind the notion that Kamen Rider in general is basically live action anime, because I do kinda agree, but Fourze in particular being the most anime? I don't know about that. I'm not saying anyone's wrong, I just honestly don't know how that is. If it's because of the high school setting, then Faiz counted way before Fourze ever did. Although that's just the main thing I wanted to get out of the way. I guess I can really start with restating that there's only so many times I can say that this show is good. The characters are good. The story is good. The action is good. Kamen Rider Fourze is good. But that's about it for me. Sure, there are some points that are great, fantastic even, although the show is overall just good. Still, as I've been saying, Fourze is a good show. It's the little things for me. Anyone, especially Yuki, going along with Gentaro's Uchu Kita, Miyu's oops, Jake being forced to fight with a Paradiser while Shun is away and being very reluctant on doing anything, Kengo slowly warming up to Gentaro, Tomoko having this cursed cloud around her, Ryusei being the straight man for the club shenanigans, Mr. Osugi making these silly faces, and even the school itself is almost like its own character. Seeing the students walk around going to class, participating in clubs, and being around when the monsters attack. Gentaro and the club arrive while counting down with the driver, then everyone having a smile on their face while just being with each other. I think that's why I really love Fourze. Through all the trials and tribulations, the ups and downs, Fourze is still there to put a smile on your face. Now for anyone who doesn't enjoy the show at all, do you just not like fun? Okay, but seriously, I've pretty much said everything I wanted to from the beginning, and now I'm restating that you should watch Kamen Rider Fourze, because we all need a little of Gentaro, Ryusei, Yuki, Kengo, Miyu, Shun, Jake, Tomoko, and Osugi in our lives. Kamen Rider Fourze is special, and I really hope you'll take the time to watch it too. With all that being said, please join me next time when we say the magic words with Kamen Rider Wizard.